To all our very loyal Blue Boar Tavern family, yet again, the BBT brought to you as usual by the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. I'm Jonathan, your bartender. Come on in, have a seat, talk amongst yourselves with your chat buttons while we talk, and just thanks for stopping by, whether you're in person live with us right now or watching us from the future on YouTube. If you are watching on YouTube in the future, please hit like and subscribe to help spread the word and boost our Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship channel algorithms, because that's what this whole episode is about, spreading the word. And to that end, we have our new Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship president, Brent Evans, and another friend, Pete Frengel, who works with high school students, teaching them Shakespeare and the Shakespeare authorship question. So they'll be joining us in a second with our regulars, Alex and Dorothea this week. Here they come. And hello, Peter. Hello, Pete.
Hello.
Nice
Hi.
to have you. I'm going to do a little talking here for a bit, but then I'm going to have you and Brent. Hi, Brent.
Hello.
Introduce yourselves. There's our Alex and Dorothea. Well, what I just wanted
Hello,
to get
everybody.
into, because this relates to spreading the word and helping get it out. These days, of course, the word of the day that we hear over and over is affordability, and everybody's feeling a pinch these days. And unfortunately, that includes the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. So I'm going to reach back to when I worked as an announcer at a national public radio station that did pledge breaks and things. And we're asking SOF members or just Blue Boar Tavern fans, or even just people interested in the Shakespeare Oxford authorship question in general, to help us out, because we're feeling the pinch too. I just got these figures. Membership dues for the SOF now only cover about 1/5 of the organization's financial needs. So, like the pledge drives you see on PBS and NPR, we're asking you to help us. In recent years, I should mention I've been involved with, it was originally the Shakespeare Oxford Society for 30 something years now. And it's gone from, as I've seen over the years, a group for sort of like-minded people to talk amongst ourselves. But in the last few years, and I've been really happy to see this, the SOF has really gone to being a force for reaching out and promoting the Oxfordian idea to the public and putting us in, and not just us, Edward de Vere, putting him in the public consciousness with the Blue Boar Tavern, going out to thousands of people, video contests, putting lectures from the conferences on YouTube. Our own Phoebe, who couldn't make it this week, but she's big among videos and reaching out and educating the public. So that's become more and more a key priority of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. But it's still a volunteer organization, and inflation's hitting us too, cutting into fundings we need to run the organization. So, yes, you can see this coming. We're asking you to think about it and commit to making maybe a small monthly donation to the SOF, or whatever you can afford. The information I was handed at first made me recoil a little bit, suggesting like 25, 35 a month. And I'm like, what? But then I thought of it the way I did during those old pledge drives I used to do, is think about what Edward de Vere and the authorship question and the Blue Boar Tavern and Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship mean in your life, and then may translate that to other areas of your life. So maybe, would you be willing to trade one restaurant meal a month and just eat ramen noodles that night? Or, well, you don't have to eat ramen noodles, but offering that up to teaching others about Edward de Vere's Shakespeare, or maybe giving up one fancy beverage a week. Maybe just walk by the coffee shop or the bar or whatever and think, okay, Edward, that one's for you. That would easily cover that amount a month. So just asking you to think about it, and that, and if you can't give that much, little gifts add up, as Dorothea has said. If every one of our viewers, every episode, gave $20 an episode, not that that's how much you have to give, but we'd get $2,000. That would help produce 4 or 5 episodes of the Blue Boar Tavern that would go out to thousands of people. So think about it. Go to the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship website, look for donate, click on that, and just follow the instructions. And you can do it even now at this moment while it's on your mind. Um, yeah. So thank you for being here. And thank you for thinking about that. And thanks for your help and your loyalty to the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship and the Blue Boar. And even more thanks for your commitment to Edward de Vere, Shakespeare. Uh, Now, here's all our friends here. Spreading the Oxfordian word, dusting off the works and teaching kids and teaching the world. We all love the Shakespeare authorship question, but if it's not continually growing and reaching new people, what's the point? So we've got our new president, Brent Evans, Peter Frengel, who's very active in teaching high school students. That's what I think you guys are going to talk about. Brent, you're going to talk about the strategy on the SOF that I sort of alluded to. Tell us a bit about yourselves, maybe. Brent, do you want to go first? Just to let us know who you are and why you're here and what you think we should know.
About myself, well, I'm retired. I spent a life in international trade, actually, mainly with Asia and the Middle East, exporting American food products. Doesn't have a lot to do with Shakespeare, but I should segue into saying that my wife and I, Patty, my wife, has was an English major in college, loves Shakespeare, and as long as we've been together, we've been, you know, quoting Shakespeare back and forth. When we get into a dispute, one of us will say, "The quality of mercy is not strained." We do that all the time. Um, and Pete, I should let you introduce yourself, but I'd like to. I have a chance, but let me let Pete talk a bit.
Hello, everybody. I'm Pete Frengel. I'm a high school teacher. I just was doing the math. I've been teaching Shakespeare for 34 years now, including my student teaching. So it's been a while. A lot of students over the years, and I developed an elective where I started teaching what was called Shakespeare in film. We'd watch the movies and we'd talk about the films, and I thought that was a really great way to get a lot of people into the plays themselves. These days, I'm at a private school in central Pennsylvania, and I teach a British lit class. So, of course, Shakespeare is pretty much like the centerpiece in the middle of the course. And so, part of what I'm going to talk about today is ways of getting students interested, ways that have worked for me anyway, and answering any questions you might have, talking about the trip I took to Denver with Brent. And hopefully, you'll find that all very interesting because we have lesson plans available, ways that you can refer teacher friends to tap into some lesson plans that are pretty much just on Shakespeare himself, but also on teaching the SAQ, the authorship question. So we'll get into that a little bit later, I guess.
So I'd like to start, Pete, with asking, what's it like to teach Shakespeare to high school students these days? We hear more and more about short attention spans, inability to deal with complex language, dropping in literacy rates. Tell us the truth.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was mentioning earlier that I teach Hamlet to freshmen, and people think that's crazy. Like freshmen are like 14, 15 years older, 15, 16 at most. And what are they going to do with Hamlet? And the interesting thing is, I think it really depends on the teacher. I think if the teacher is enthusiastic and loves the material, the students pick up on that. And I think you guys can remember when you were in class, you could really genuinely tell if a teacher loves something. And when they were teaching something they loved, that really communicates. That's an ethereal property you can't necessarily hand to someone else. But I think that goes a long way, a love for the subject matter. I think I haven't noticed a really great falling off in attention spans, and in terms of what I've noticed, of course, is AI. Everyone's trying to use AI to write, to do their essays, to do their presentations. If they're not using it to write for them, they're at least consulting it. And that's become a real issue in education today, especially for English teachers. But that's a topic for another time. Teaching the play itself is I can talk about my experience of teaching Hamlet, for example. Start off with some basic background.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that.
Sure. I just start with some basic background, like Shakespearean conventions, like an aside, a soliloquy, a monologue, some of the basic conventions. We talk about some of the language that's different, how Shakespeare's language works, basically, for about a day or two. We talk about the Renaissance in England a little bit, and then we dive into the play. And what I tend to do is we'll read the play, we'll read a scene in class, and then I'll stop, and then I'll go back through the scene, and we'll kind of take it apart, image by image or important idea or important line. And I tend to ask the students pointed questions. Like, what do you think he's saying when, for example, when Hamlet says, "It seems, madam, it is particular. I know not seems, madam." And then I think the students can connect to that because they're used to like their parents not understanding them. So of course, when Hamlet is being like with Gertrude and Claudius completely like not listening to their son at all and not seeing his emotional pain, I think that's the place where the students typically connect is in Act One, Scene Two. They like the ghost in Act One, Scene One, but you know,
They do.
that's always an attention grabber.
Yeah, it's a play
But,
that opens with the ghost. I mean, what could be better than that?
and I ask them questions like, "So why do you think it starts with a ghost?" And they tend to come up with pretty good answers. Um, I think it really is about a Socratic method of teaching and really going around the class and asking them pointed questions to keep them thinking. I'm lucky at this point in my career that I'm teaching very small class sizes at a small private school. And so again, I can really engage students even better. I used to teach, 28 kids at a time, and that was a lot more challenging. Uh, the methods of teaching are different in a large public school classroom. I did that for 20 years. And it's different.
So,
Indeed, I
Pete, do
think that,
you
I'm sorry,
go? No, go ahead, Jonathan.
I was just going to say, I think the next question on everyone's mind, and I see it in our questions, is how do you then, or do you introduce the authorship question, or do you get into it before you get into the plays,
Right.
or
I,
spring it on them in the middle, or what do you
Great
do?
question. And that's really the meat and potatoes of what we're doing here tonight. I used to do a unit of like 3 or 4 lessons, even five or an entire week of lessons, in which the students were assigned different topics in the authorship question. Like you research the Stratford man, and here's questions for and against the authorship of the guy from Stratford. Here's Edward de Vere, the Earl of Oxford. Here are places to look for and against his authorship of the plays. We looked at Ben Jonson and Christopher Marlowe just as kind of figures in the controversy. And then we would kind of report back with presentations. At one year, I actually had the kids make short films on Apple, like on iMovie. They made short little films of like, here's Ben Jonson, here's how he's related to the authorship question. That method was interesting, but I think there wasn't a lot of, I feel like the curiosity wasn't as exciting to the students at that point. And what I've learned over the years, that was maybe 10 years ago I did that. What I've learned now is that a little bit goes a lot further. So, for example, I will simply drop into the conversation early on that it's quite possible that the guy you see with the bald head and the goatee and the
You?
yeah, the huge ruff. Is that you, Mr. Frengel? And the big ruff. And, I showed him the drosh out and I said, this is what most people think is the guy that wrote the plays. I said, but there's a lot of questions about this. And what I'll do is I'll just hit them very quickly.
Sort of ease it in.
Ease it in, and I'll just drop the idea into their minds, and then I won't mention it for a while. And pretty soon in class, they'll start saying, "What did you say earlier about this guy?" And for example, in the scene in Act One, Scene Two of Hamlet, where Claudius is giving directions to the ambassadors to Norway, Voldemort and Cornelius, and he's saying, it's very formal language and it's very courtly language. And I might just simply say, I wonder like how Shakespeare got that language so correct in terms of how a king would address another king of another country and send, ambassadors to that country. And then I'll say, well, of course, one of ideas is that a guy named Edward de Vere wrote the plays, and he was an earl, and that's how I tend to drop it in, and it tends to get them more interested in that way, as opposed to doing the entire opening lesson on the SAQ.
Nobody likes to be told what to think. But
Yeah,
if
Or
you
hitting
make
them
a
over the head.
mystery out of it, or you make a
exactly.
secret out of it, it draws people in more. Do they argue with each other over the point by
It, that was
midterm?
Yeah, that was an interesting question. I think when I did the full research type project, I then asked everybody, well, who do you think wrote the plays? And we did a survey in class. And then we would get arguments. It was a Stratford guy, of course it was. His name's on the title pages. And then you'd have another kid, yeah, but he didn't have any education, and he didn't, he didn't have the travels to Italy. And then you would have the arguments back and forth. What I do now, I think, is more effective because at the bottom of one of the handouts I give them, it's all Google Docs. So they have their classroom worksheet. And then at the bottom of the worksheet, I said, and if you're curious, and I just kind of scroll down a little bit, here's an entire question about if you want to read further. And it's funny because I see some of the kids who are the more curious ones get started, and I can see that they're like digging into that material. And then I start noticing that it appears more frequently in discussions where they're thinking about it, as opposed to, like and you said, Dorothea, if I tell them this is what I think, it kind of kills the curiosity. Like, I really don't think Shakespeare wrote his work. I don't even say that. I
No, we
said,
really
no.
can't.
I said,
Ron, we've got a message from Ron here
yeah.
um, saying, very insightful, I think. If you make it seem as if they thought of it themselves, then they've bought into the idea.
It's absolutely true. Yeah, that is how students think. And I think you guys probably remember thinking in class, uh, questions that you had that maybe excited your curiosity. I think that works so much better. There's an old saying of if there is like straw or hay or kindling available, and you just put that spark in there, it's going to start a fire more readily than if you're kind of going around and handing them, the box of matches necessarily. They like to think that this is something that they're kind of coming up with. And of course, there's a rebellious streak in every teenager. Like,
That I was going to ask about that as well. What team does not like to rebel against the
yeah,
status quo?
yeah.
Yeah, I
And
had the image of you like having the puzzle pieces there, and you're just sort of da, 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 setting them out.
it's more effective. And I used to get up and say, this is really interesting and think about this. Now I'm a lot more subtle, and it's a lot more effective because they do like to think they've got one over. Maybe they'll talk to their former English teacher or to their parents and say, do you really think this guy wrote his work? And it's hilarious. And they'll come in and they'll say things in class that show that they've been thinking about it. I think
You,
that's more effective.
you know, Pete, I've talked to a lot of adults who have told me they heard something about the authorship question when they were a kid, maybe in high school, and they left it for 2 decades or 3 decades. And then that little spark suddenly flares up later on in life when they have time to really explore it.
Yeah, definitely. It germinates. It gets in there, and it has them thinking at least. And here's the greatest writer in the English language. He's an icon, really. And to have the students wondering if is there actually a mystery behind like who this person was, and then that, of course. I mean, this is one of I think, the great questions of all time. It's a wonderful rabbit hole to go down and to really explore all the evidence. And so because part of it is that there is a lot of evidence. I think that's a difficulty in teaching it. You have to really take days to show, like, here's all the information you need to know about the Stratford man to even start. And then here's all the information. And that takes a lot of classroom instructional time. And that's what I found wasn't really paying off for me was giving all that information. Then it's just like, this is kind of like I'm just being hit with information as opposed to,
Yeah. And the plays themselves do the work for you.
they do. They
Once
do.
once the idea is planted that it's an aristocrat who lived inside the court,
Yeah.
all of a sudden you begin to see the number of characters
Hmm.
who are characters in the court, who are people in positions of power, they are kings and queens and dukes and princesses and well-off daughters of rich fathers. And, this is not the world of Stratford unless you believe that Will spent all his time standing around in court and, scribbling notes, right, about everything that he saw. It's
Yeah.
hard to believe it wasn't someone who grew up in that environment.
Yeah, Alex, did you have something you were gonna?
Yeah, I've got two questions for Pete. They're kind of related. Um, is your course a requirement? And also, you say it's a survey of English lit, if I
Yeah,
recall
British.
correctly, about how much of what are the other topics you cover
Sure.
besides Shakespeare?
Oh, good question. It's a survey of British lit, so it's literally Beowulf to Virginia Woolf, so the two wolves. That's what we call it. We have, Beowulf in the beginning, and we have Virginia Woolf is kind of where we end up in the 20th century with modernism. And so it's a survey all between. I also teach the Canterbury Tales, Chaucer, after Beowulf. Then it's, of course, Shakespeare. I kind of skip over a little of the Enlightenment writers like Pope and those, but then I go to, after Shakespeare, I go to the Romantic poets, um, Blake, Wordsworth, Coleridge. From there, then it's I do one Oscar Wilde play, Importance of Being Earnest, and then we get to modernism, the 20th century. We look at Virginia Woolf, some short stories of hers, and then we end up with uh, Lord of the Flies, actually, which is kind of funny. It kind of brings us back to Beowulf with the savagery and the civilization question. So that's the entire class. Now, Shakespeare takes up a really large portion in the center of that. So I probably spend an outsized amount of time on it. It's the largest unit that I teach. Um, and if you think about the progression of the play, it's a great play to drop in the hints, as I was saying earlier. But just think about when Hamlet's attacked by pirates, and I say, you know who else was attacked by pirates? And of course, that always gets a rise out of them. And by that time, some of the kids actually know. Like, oh, I heard about that. Like, I read about Edward de Vere because it's in my materials at the bottom of the thing. Or
Oh, it
they've,
seems like. Oh, sorry.
yeah,
It
it's a
seems
bit.
like one. Oh, sorry, but one. You made the connection. You start with Beowulf or something.
Yeah.
One great connection might be, oh, later on, oh, in Hamlet, people compare or have found parallels between the last scene in Hamlet to Beowulf, which we studied earlier. And there
The
was
dying.
only one copy in existence at the time, and guess who had access to it? that,
Exactly.
that sort of
Yeah.
thing. You can tie it to other things you're talking about.
Absolutely.
So,
That, yeah.
so Pete, with all of this experience teaching high school students, decades of it, you have put together some materials. You and Brent have gone to a very important conference for teachers of English. Can we hear a little bit about the conference first, and then maybe more about what you've done with your teaching materials that makes them widely available?
Brent, let me hand this to you since I've been talking a lot, but you were the mastermind behind the conference, so please, I want you to address that first.
Well, Brian Wildenthal, Pete, and I attended the last National Council of Teachers of English convention in Denver last year. 8,000 secondary level teachers attend. Some of them are primary school, but lots and lots of middle school and high school students. The people we talked to, they were women primarily, and they were between the ages of 30 and 45. And we had a booth set up.
Hmm.
Anybody who came by the booth got a copy of the Shakespeare Authorship Coalition's Declaration of Reasonable Doubt and a copy of the Oxfordian Narrative. Um, and we talked to hundreds of teachers, didn't we, Pete? Over
Yeah.
3 intense days. And the thing that struck me most was that either they didn't know about the authorship question, or if they did, they were open to it. I only talked to one male high school teacher who sort of stood back and said, I choose to disagree.
Yeah.
But everyone else that I talked to they were enthusiastic, and in particular, they were grateful for advice and the lesson plans that we developed um, to help them teach Shakespeare because it's a challenge nowadays. Pete, I was going to ask you, the typical high school teacher, not in your environment maybe, but in a public school, they don't have very much time to teach Shakespeare. They might have 4 weeks or
Hmm.
uh,
Yeah, that
didn't
was a
have the time to
consideration.
teach Shakespeare. Yeah.
That was
But
definitely a
it was,
consideration would be the lesson plans. Yeah.
but really, I was pleasantly surprised, weren't you, Pete?
Yeah, absolutely. At certain points, probably 3 or 4 times during out each day that we were there was a line like 3 or 4 people deep waiting to talk to us. And I was like, this is crazy. Like everyone was interested in the topic. At a certain point, we had like I was talking to 3 people, Brian was talking to 3 people, Brent was talking to. It was like the whole. It was an L-shaped table at the conference, and then people were lined up like seven, eight,
Oh,
nine deep talking to us. And so it was a wonderful experience. I only had one person look at me like she just bit a sour lemon when I mentioned the SAQ. Obviously,
right.
she knew a little bit about it and was already had her mind made up. I want to
Mhm.
thank Ellie Slotkin, a parent at our school, actually, Harrisburg Academy in Pennsylvania. She made a poster of Taylor Swift, which was incredible because people were drawn to that poster because they saw Taylor Swift in the swag and they went over to that corner and they picked up some stickers there. But it was a wonderful chance to kind of say, oh, by the way, here's who we are. And
Mhm.
it drew a lot of people to our booth because she kind of
That's
compared,
clever.
yeah,
Yeah,
Shakespeare lyrics to Taylor Swift lyrics to Shakespeare quotations. And it was a great, she
for
made a
people
big,
who don't know, Taylor Swift apparently has composed what, a whole album of Shakespeare-related songs,
well,
about
they're on
40
different
albums.
albums, but sure,
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
quite a
I
few.
didn't know that. Wow.
Mhm.
Well,
Not
Mhm.
it's
about the
really
authorship question, but she's interested in Shakespeare itself, the works.
I'm really interested and gratified to hear you guys talk about your experience there because I remember long ago in the distance past here on the Blue Boar Tavern, we had a talk about the state of the debate and how we think we're doing over time. And I observed the same thing from when I got into this, bunch of years ago. Because a front line, a bunch of people are
Oh yeah.
noting in the comments here that was the same with me. But over time, I guess one question we brought up on that episode is how we're doing. Are we winning? And I just had to say, yeah, I think so. Because what I've seen over time is the stigma attached to doubting is sort of pretty gone mostly. And a lot of people are really interested, and Edward de Vere can be mentioned in mainstream comic strips. And as just a reference, people are expected to get. And Edward de Vere can be a punchline, or the punchline in a cartoon in the New Yorker can be based on the audience knowing about the authorship.
Yeah.
So that stigma has just sort of much more gone away over time. And I'm glad to hear you guys experiencing the same. And
Jonathan, I was hoping to have a chance to back up a little bit and just
okay,
talk in
sure.
general. Um, Over the last year or so, I think Oxfordians have noticed that we're doing these things like aggressively going after
Yeah,
teachers and
yeah.
providing them teaching materials. And we're advertising now in theater playbills around the country, trying to get people curious about the authorship question. And we're creating animated videos, short videos that we hope will be used on social media, not for Oxfordians, but for others. And I'd like to just talk a little bit for a moment about what's going on here. Why are we
Please,
doing
please.
this?
Yes. Yes.
You know, probably 4 or 5 years ago, I sat down and read Jim Warren's amazing 757-page Shakespeare revolutionized history of the Oxfordian movement. And Um, it's an amazing accomplishment. I can't thank Jim enough. But at the very end of that book is a chapter 26, called Completing the Oxfordian Revolution. And I think it's been overlooked because it's at the back of this huge tome. But when I got to it, I found it very helpful in thinking about the strategies for the future. Um, Jim leaned heavily on the ideas of Thomas Kuhn, who wrote back in the 60s about the structure of scientific revolutions. And without getting too far down in the weeds, Thomas Kuhn, who studied scientific advance, um, found that change is not linear or progressive. It goes in fits and starts. He's the guy who invented the idea of the paradigm shift. That was coined by Thomas Kuhn. And Jim argues that it applies to all orthodoxies, not just scientific ones. I think we all have heard the physicist Max Planck say science advances by one funeral at a time. You know, the embedded orthodoxy, Kuhn and Jim Warren argue, will never concede.
No,
They will never, they'll be the last ones to ever
they
admit
must be.
that they
Yeah.
have it wrong. And Jim argues that we shouldn't be trying to attack the bastions, these great bastions of orthodoxy. We should be essentially going around them, isolating them. We should be attracting allies. And I can personally say this, 10 years ago, I was sitting watching a YouTube video of Mark Rylance and Derek Jacobi talk about the Oxfordian question. We'd loved Shakespeare our whole lives. And here are two esteemed Shakespearean actors telling me, giving me permission really, to think that the conventional authorship narrative doesn't make any sense. And, I started reading Diana Price and Charlton Ogburn, and away I went, and I haven't been the same since. Well, on reflection, I actually thought about that, and I wasn't only mad at myself for not having learned about it sooner, but I was a little bit irked that the Shakespeare or the Oxfordian movement hadn't gotten to me sooner. I mean, I was 65, and I think, as you said, I think we've been a little bit inward looking rather than outward looking, and we do have allies out there. Anybody who loves Shakespeare is a potential ally. And so obviously we want to let playgoers know about the the authorship question. We want to let teachers who are great amplifiers of the message know about the authorship question. Historians, lawyers like Dorothea, librarians like Michael Dudley. There's a whole host of people, actors and dramaturges and others. They need to hear about us. But there's another part of this that's that's intriguing. Just letting them know is probably not enough. Part of this paradigm shift idea, Thomas Kuhn suggests that the old orthodoxies will never collapse by just attacking them directly. Their raison d'etre can disappear and they'll still limp along. You actually need another paradigm. You need a fully formed place for people in the Stratfordian man. And that means we have to be a little more assertive and courageous about asserting that Edward de Vere is the place to go, that we have 100 years of accumulated textual and circumstantial evidence. Nothing in that 100 years has ever disproved Edward de Vere was the author. Let's give our allies a place to go, and ultimately let's give scholars a place to jump to when they're ready to abandon the Stratford case. So that's kind of what we're trying to do here. We're trying to do outreach to playgoers and to teachers, certainly, and other groups. And eventually, academia will be isolated islands that will be made to look ridiculous, ultimately, to hold on to this old orthodoxy. So thank you for listening to me lecture, but this is, I've been sending this. I've been sending this chapter to anyone who wants it. If anyone out there would like to read it, send me an email. I have permission from Jim Warren to share it around. It's a fascinating read. I really recommend it.
Oh, thank you for sharing all that, and don't apologize for it. Somebody's asking, what is that book, and I think they mean the Kuhn book. What's the title of that one?
The Kuhn book is Structure of Evolution, Thomas Kuhn. It was written, I think, in 1962, but it's a seminal work. But the Jim Warren book is Shakespeare Revolution, which is the history of the movement. It's a book in itself. But I have permission from Jim to share that last chapter. I have it in digital form if anyone would like to read it.
Ooh, wonderful.
But it's what informs me in designing the vision for the Oxfordian movement in the future.
Somebody's asking, your voice dropped out, sort of. You had some spotty audio there for a second. What was the title of the Kuhn book, if you have that handy?
The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, Thomas
We gave-
Kuhn, K-U-H.
Just look up
Am I
Thomas
breaking
Kuhn.
up?
You'll see it.
Yeah.
UHN.
Oh, somebody found it there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
There you go. AUHN. Thanks, Ron.
Oh, there. Yes.
Yeah.
Um,
So I'll get off my soapbox.
well, what you were saying, Brent, made me think of a point that ties into what you were talking about, Pete, about teaching students. I think the same principle applies to the dealing with the public: is don't beat people over the head, use a light touch.
A light touch, but I think a confident touch. What Brent was saying,
Confident, but
confident, and what Brent was saying takes us to our next step, which is Philadelphia.
okay.
This fall, we're going to go to the NCTE again, the National Council of Teachers of English Conference. And we have, I think, honed our technique. Brent had the idea of having a QR code where teachers can just scan it with their phones, hop right onto our website, boom, get right on our mailing list. I don't know how many dozens of people we added to the mailing list, Brent, but it was quite a few.
Whoa.
You could
170? 170.
70 new teachers to the mailing list. That's awesome. And this time we're going to have more than one binder. I had a binder of the lesson plans, and that really seemed to excite them. Oh, lesson plans. Oh, they loved it. And how to teach Shakespeare's language. And then there were lessons in there, of course, about a mini lesson on the SAQ, like a 1 day lesson. There was a 3 or 4 day like kind of symposium with a debate and a trial, a research unit. And then there was just kind of fun things like Shakespeare insults that are pretty famous for teachers. The students love to throw the Shakespearean insults at each other. But we're going to have multiple binders when we go to Philadelphia. We're going to have multiple QR codes when we go to Philadelphia. And I've actually applied to do a conference, an actual speaking engagement to the conference on the SAQ in the classroom.
Whoa.
So I've already submitted that proposal and we're waiting to hear back. So hopefully the proposal will be accepted. I think it might. Right before COVID, I was accepted to speak at the NCTE conference, and COVID hit and they canceled the conference. They only had online sessions. And I already had the speech ready to go. Roger Strittmatter was ready to go with me, and we were going to do this conference, and boom, everything fell apart with COVID. So I think that it's a similar proposal. I've refined it slightly, but I think Philadelphia will be able to have an actual discussion with teachers in a forum and inviting them to talk about the SAQ in the classroom. So that should be exciting.
Was
And-
there,
Pete, we're going to have these new 5-minute animations on a screen that just loop as well for people to attract people in. That'll work perfectly.
was
So
there
to jump
anybody-
back, I'm going to jump back a second to my introduction here. This is what your donations to the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship are helping with. Things like this and reaching out to all these curious people out there who there is way less stigma about it. People are curious, and we need to be able to meet them where they are. So I just wanted to put in that little commercial just for a second. Now back to our regularly scheduled program.
I'd just
Dorothy.
like to highlight Pete's generosity, because on the SOF website, under resources, yes, are some of those
Resources.
very lesson plans for
All of them.
anyone listening. Joyful discussion. You can go on the website for the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship and find exactly what it is that Pete is talking about for yourself, and perhaps use it either in your own lesson plans or in some other fashion.
Thank you for the plug. If you know a teacher, I think these are useful for any classroom teacher of Shakespeare. There's lessons for Hamlet, Macbeth, um, uh,
Romeo and Juliet.
Romeo and Juliet, and now we just added A Midsummer Night's Dream, which I think are the four biggies that are typically taught in the secondary level. So there's lesson plans kind of tailored for each of those plays. And then of course there's SAQ lessons and things. Well, if you go to the website, you'll see what's available.
Got a couple good comments here, insightful ones. Somebody,
Mm.
the prevalence of technology means the Stratfordians can't stifle the debate, at least as easily. They try, but this is what you said, Brent, about going around them. And
Mhm.
they hate that we can go around them now. And we have an interesting question here from our regular friend from Germany asking, do teachers in the US have the freedom to teach the authorship question in class, or are there restrictions by curriculum, by school boards, managements, by headmasters?
Excellent question.
Yeah.
And yeah, I remember we were in correspondence, Jan, with that question. That is a great question. It depends on the school. In some schools, a lot of teaching is taking place that is teaching to the test, to standardized tests in America, and it's really a shame. It cuts into what you can accomplish. It cuts into the freedom you have. I am in an incredible situation in the private school where I teach in Harrisburg Academy where I have almost complete autonomy to make my own lessons. When I was in public school, there was a more of a constraint, but certainly I could teach a lesson or two to make it relevant to doing a research project, for example, which is part of what they need to learn. Teaching Shakespeare is part of the curriculum. I can slide in, even if it's a 20-minute lesson or uh, some of the materials. So it is doable. To teach a full unit on the SAQ, I think would even in the with the freedom that I have, I think would be not that responsible because there's a lot of things that the students need to be learning. To teach just the authorship question because it fascinates me is not, I don't think, a necessarily a good use of instructional time. But certainly, I've found it even more effective, which is ironic and interesting, just dropping in the hints and the clues, and then giving them substantial nuggets that they can hold on to and build upon directly from the plays. I think that's been most effective.
So
You
there's
know,
an openness to it, but you got to work within a
Yeah,
structure, but within
absolutely.
that you can do it.
Yeah.
Jonathan, I was reflecting
Yeah.
today about or we're talking about Jens Munishow, and his father and I have been talking about Shakespeare in Germany. And I've learned that Shakespeare is beloved in Germany.
Big, big, big.
After Friedrich Schiller, he's like number two. And I was reflecting, my experience in Japan. The Japanese love Shakespeare. Their most famous film director made films based on Shakespearean themes, like Ran
Kurosawa?
and
Yeah.
yeah, Kurosawa. Um, and to me, it's astonishing because for me, it's the language, it's the words that I love. But there's more there. It must be the themes as
Yeah.
well. I think probably Shakespeare translates into German better than it does Japanese, but around the world, people love Shakespeare even in their own language, which is, if you think about it, given the challenges of translation, astonishing. And yet they do. There's
I'm
something universal
going to throw in a couple
about
comments
Shakespeare.
here before we run out of time with them, but this is a nice one to hear. Someone saying, greetings from Tucson, Arizona. I've been listening to this show from the beginning, and I'm so thrilled to learn about the progress we're making in schools and how the stigma of non-Stratfordianism is on the wane.
Mm.
It is thrilling. I mean, this is a great time to be living in if you're. Um, Several people have asked this about um, another thing we used to do, or somebody says, what happened to the video contest?
Mhm.
And somebody says, I was wondering what happened to that as well. It was fantastic. So anyone have any?
We decided to give it a rest. We might bring it back in the future. But as always, it takes somebody to run the
I
video
think that's a big
contest.
part. Yeah, it takes somebody
So
devoting
if anybody who
tons of
would
time.
like the video contest to come back, would like to be the volunteer to make that happen, you can write Brent Evans and he would be happy to hear from you. It also takes money to run the video contest because there are prizes given to the first, second, and third place winners.
But I like the
And
idea.
so we would say
I think
again,
we
we'd like the video contest to come back. Be sure to put in a donation to the SOF, and we'll see if we get someone to run it, we'll see if we can make it happen.
And Jonathan, I can be reached simply by writing to info.
Oh, you're freezing up again.
Yeah, info at
Shakespeare
ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.com, right?
.org.
.org.
.org. Yeah, yeah,
Info at ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org.
Yeah.
yeah.
That'll get
There was a question I think Ellie asked, which I thought
I
was a
was
great
I was
question.
going to
You
get to
got it,
that one.
Jonathan? Okay.
Yeah, I was going to ask that one for Pete. Is this one you're looking at, Dorothea? Are there any questions your students continually seem to ask about the Shakespeare Oxford question,
Definitely.
authorship question, year after year?
You could probably imagine which question would be number one. Like, why would he not take credit for his work? If Edward de Vere wrote the plays, why would he not take credit? And so that is the most frequently asked question, because in today's society, you know, Stephen King writes novels and his name's on them. He makes money from those novels. They think of a commercial writer earning money from plays or from writing, and that's their living. And so they have a really hard time understanding like how different the time period was. So talking about the aristocracy, when we're looking at, for example, the importance of being earnest. These people don't do jobs. They don't work. They don't have a livelihood. They're not out earning a crust. Their job is to play, and they were writing plays and they were writing music, and so for the Earl of Oxford, the taboo against putting his name onto a commercial script for the commercial stage was taboo, and so that's the number one question I get. Like, why wouldn't he claim credit if he wrote them? It makes sense. They're thinking in today's standards. The other question is, how do you know that the Stratford man didn't write them? And I say to them, here's a challenge. And this is actually the most fun part of the whole thing for me. I said, if you can find any evidence between the day he was born, 1564, to the day he died, 1616, that connects to actually writing anything with his hand, like you will get a prize. You will get like extra credit. And then that sends them scrambling because they can't find any. The signatures, I say, not his signatures on a document. It has to be something where he actually wrote something, a letter or a manuscript. And that drives them crazy because they think it has to be. He wrote 39 plays. He wrote 150 sonnets, whatever. And it drives them crazy. So that I think is a great way to get their interest. So those are the two questions I get the most. And I love saying, find me something that he actually wrote. And it drives them nuts because they can't find anything.
Well, that kind of leads to a question. As I'm sure you know, at the college level, as well as for the reasons you said, at many schools have to teach to the test, so they have less time to focus on an individual work of literature, whatever it might be. And we see a similar event at the college level. That is, fewer and fewer courses offered about Shakespeare. I think at my alma mater for English majors, there's no requirement that you take a Shakespeare course. They still offer one, I think, but I'm not even sure they offer it every semester. Given all that, and that's kind of, Shakespeare's kind of fallen into the, what would you call it, dead white man category, and there's less emphasis on reading works of literature by dead white men. My question specifically, though, is if it should turn out that the paradigm shifts, and there are reasons to shift the paradigm just as a matter of historical honesty, but forgetting about that, is Shakespeare going to be even less popular at the college level if it's discovered that he's a dead white aristocrat? That really scares me.
I think that's the number one charge that Oxfordians face is the snobbery, the elitism
Yeah.
charge. And I always say, look, Ben Jonson and Christopher Marlowe came from more humble origins than the guy from Stratford. His dad was a glove maker. That's at least like middle classish. Whereas, Marlowe's dad was a cobbler. Johnson's stepfather was a bricklayer, a mason. And I said, it doesn't mean that they couldn't become. And so I always take the snobbery charge head on and I say, we know that Johnson and Marlowe came from more humble backgrounds, as humble as Shakespeare, but they did it, and we have evidence of it. We just don't have evidence that the guy from Stratford did, and that kind of shuts them up pretty quickly.
That's a
You know,
great.
I was thinking we get into this because I know you do a Reddit thread where they sort of swarm to that. Um, because tying it into something I said earlier about I think we're winning. I mean, we're spreading out there, the stigma's vanishing, but that, like, well, Brent talked about it either, is they're, what am I trying to say? They start to fight back. And I've actually put up a video myself from the video contest called Thank You Stratfordians, because the very fact they always show up and start fighting us shows they see us as a credible threat. So
True.
thank you for the compliment, Stratfordians, and I mean it. So yeah, I think this is a big thing we'd have to work on going forward is how do you deal with these trolls that are starting to swarm around us the way I address the snobbery, because I get into comment threads on YouTube and
Oh, yeah.
every freaking time it's the snobbery thing, or they think a commoner can't write great literature.
Yeah,
And
I always use Ben Jonson and Christopher Marlowe because they did, and we can see where they were educated. We can see
right,
we have contemporaries saying, "Oh yeah, Ben Jonson wrote this," and Christopher Marlowe, Tamberlane. Yeah, I saw them, and so we have a lot of direct evidence for those. Especially Jonson is just a lot of it.
yeah,
And so that's the taking them head on. If I could mention, this is not affiliated with the SOF at all, but I do run a debate on Reddit. It's called SAQ Debate. If you're looking, and where I kind of moderate people that get on and I get attacked by ox frauds all the
yeah.
time, the ox frauds.
We did a whole
But I
episode on them once. Yeah.
but I actually got on the largest Shakespeare subreddit. It's just our Shakespeare. It's a huge, it's thousands of visitors a day. And in coordination with the moderators of that subreddit, I said, you don't want to have the SAQ on your subreddit. You want to just avoid it. Send them to me. And so I've been like fielding like a lot of people who come to my subreddit because it's not allowed on the main Shakespeare subreddit to even discuss the SAQ on the main subreddit. So they come over to where I am.
Here's how I've addressed the snobbery thing. I'll throw it out to the rest of you to try it because it's something I I worked as a therapist at an abuse domestic violence agency for quite a time, and you use the tactics in dealing with abusers and just apply that to the obnoxious Stratfordians.
Yeah.
And one thing you do is you go meta. You just instead of getting into the nitty details, because they love to draw you into the details to parse things to death, you pull back and talk about what they're doing and their tactics, and it disarms them. So in this case, when people bring up the snobbery thing, I just address that and say, "Oh, there's the predictable snobbery thing in which Stratfordians rewrite Doubter's argument into something else so they can avoid dealing with the real argument." And I say that in 30 years of dealing with the authorship question, I have never once heard a doubter claim that common people can't write great literature.
Yeah.
That's how they rewrite the question. What
Yeah.
we do is we doubt this one individual based on the evidence wrote that body of work. That's
Exactly.
all. It doesn't generalize out. And they never have an answer to that.
Right, and I agree. And getting back to Alex's point about dead white guys, survey of British literature is largely dead white guys. I don't think having Oxford being more dead and more white, if that's possible, than the guy from Stratford is going to affect the issue. I think the plays have magic in them. The plays have wonderment in them. And I think is every generation will discover them, and I believe the work will speak for itself for generations to come. I don't think we need to worry about its place in the schools and the universities because I just believe the quality of what he achieved will always speak to people.
Yeah, that's part of the universality that I was speaking of. I mean, it speaks to people across the globe.
Yeah.
I don't think that'll go away.
Mhm.
I think one key thing when dealing with people, the obnoxious ones in these forums, first of all, is to not look like a nut or a snob, but also to realize that when you're doing that, you're not really arguing with them, the person who's pitching all this stuff at you. You're arguing for the benefit of any open-minded people who are quietly observing the interaction.
Exactly.
That's who
Exactly.
you're trying to reach. And the more calm, rational, polite, and fact-based you can be, the more it reduces them to
Exactly. No,
irrationality and hysterics.
you've nailed it. You've absolutely nailed it. I always try to take the high road, and I don't get in the gutter and sling mud. When someone is slinging mud, I immediately give them a moderator note, like this is about a respectful forum, evidence-based. I always draw them back to evidence. It drives them crazy because they just want to say this is a conspiracy. They want to say all the
And
hogwash.
that's where, yes, this is where I
And
go meta again, and I say, what I have said, I'll just leave it to others here to notice which of the two people in this interaction is
yeah,
resorting to insults and name calling and swearing, and which one
exactly.
is it?
Exactly,
So it
exactly. And it works wonders.
sounds to me like Jonathan and Pete, you two need to back each other up on these forums.
Yeah,
Sounds to me
Oh,
like you're arguing, right? You're
absolutely.
I
arguing
wish I
so
could clone
well.
myself into several other people.
You know, and there's nothing elitist about the Oxfordian movement. I mean, we're just teachers and independent scholars and journalists and
Yeah,
historians and regular playgoers. I mean, there's nothing elitist or snobbish about the movement. I don't know why they think we would embrace that notion or how they can claim that. I mean, we're just talking about the historical gaps and the problems with the biography. You know, we have 70 plus documents that show Shakespeare as a great businessman and not one that shows he's a playwright. How do
Hmm.
you explain that?
Yeah.
Well, Brent, the reason is that when there aren't any other good arguments,
Mm,
snobbery remains sort of the one piece of spaghetti you can throw against the wall and see if it sticks.
yeah.
yeah. And when you can shoot that down and say,
Yeah.
well, yeah, then they're left with nothing. Jens has another comment that I actually used in my Thank You Stratfordians video.
Mm,
Mahatma Gandhi allegedly said, because it's not known if he did, but the sentiment is great. First, they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win.
right.
And they're in the fighting stage. They can't ignore us or laugh at us anymore. They're fighting us. So that means we're on the way to winning.
And
I
that
don't.
that that actually is a segue back to Thomas Kuhn again, who says that this this the pressure builds up and they become more and more agitated as the pressure builds, and
Oh, it's great. It's
eventually,
great to see them reduced. Yeah.
yeah, the
It's
more
great to see them
animated
being
they get.
reduced to hysterics and
Yeah,
emotionalism.
that's right. That's right. I actually had a friend I was talking to about it. And when I told her about the authorship question in Oxford, she shrieked at me and said, "Is nothing sacred?" Which
That's a revealing word, sacred.
yeah,
Sacred,
sacred.
yeah. Well, it's like
So
Elizabeth Winkler. Elizabeth Winkler's book. The subtitle of that book is perfect, and other heresies. It literally
Right.
is heresy, and they defend it as a passionate religious zealot would.
That's the
she
most
was a guest
important
on the show
word.
here. I'm sorry, Alex. I was just going to
That's the
say
most
Elizabeth
important
Winkler was
word
a
in her
guest.
title is heresies,
Yeah.
Mm.
because academically it's accepted as a matter of faith that the
Right.
Stratford man is the author.
I like the phrase institutional inertia. I think that's a really good phrase. What it is, it is institutional inertia. And like you were saying, Brent, about generationally, you need to be planting seeds that will come along in 20 years, 30 years to change how people are seeing this.
Well, Pete, I don't think we can't thank you enough for your contributions in this effort
Yeah,
with
truly.
teaching.
And your
It's
generosity in sharing too, Pete, it's really admirable.
Well, thanks so much. Thanks so much. I love giving lesson plans to, especially to younger teachers who are starting out. And I think to have that, I'm not going to call it a Trojan horse because they get the lesson plan, and then at the bottom there's this little disclaimer. Have you ever thought about this question? But it is about intellectual curiosity, and I do want to see the question
Yeah.
spread.
Comments coming up here. Thank you, Peter, and everyone. Peter, thank you. Keep it up.
Sure. Thank you.
That's what they're saying here. Um, and we have, well, it's just about closing time, everybody. But I just want to throw out again, please go to the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship website if you enjoy this show, if you enjoy what we're doing, if you support reaching out to the world, and because we are winning. So if you want to help, go to the website, Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, look for donate, and think about giving what you can. Think about giving up a coffee a week and donating that to us. Not me personally.
Although we might buy you a coffee too.
That'd be nice. Okay, I'll brew some up here. Okay, thank you, everybody. And thank you, Brent, especially, and Peter, especially, and our great regulars, Alex, Dorothea. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you. All right. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. This was great.
Thank you.